My name is Jeremy Berry. I'm a partner at McKenna, Long & Aldridge, and I appreciate everyone being here today. I think for an important symposium, and certainly today, our keynote speaker. It's a true honor and privilege today to be able to introduce a good friend and one of the state's top public servants, or I guess for right now, former public servants, but hopefully the former won't be for too long, Jason Carter. In the fall of 2014, when Jason was running for governor, Atlanta Magazine had a profile on Jason. And the picture on the top front was a picture of him, and behind him were three pictures that I think tell a lot about Jason. There were two pictures of his family, his wife Kate, and his two boys Henry and Thomas. And then next to that one picture was a picture of Martin Luther King that Jason kept in his campaign office. And I think those three pictures really tell a lot about Jason and his priorities. The other is UGA football, but as an Alabama football fan, I'm not going to discuss that in this room. Jason's a ninth generation Georgian, and it comes from a long line of public servants. One of his grandfathers was a state senator, J.B. Langford, and the other was our 39th president, Jimmy Carter. Public service and commitment to others obviously runs deep in Jason's lineage. After he graduated college from Duke, Jason decided to do something that many of us think about but never truly act on, and he decided to serve others. Jason enrolled in the Peace Corps, in part to convince himself not to go to law school. During his time in the Peace Corps, I think he learned a lot about society, learned about the haves and the have-nots, and he also picked up the ability to speak Zulu and Siswati. Did I pronounce that correct?
No, it's all right.
And he's honest. Jason came back from his time in South Africa and enrolled in UGA Law School and decided that the law was, for him, but he also continued his public service in helping others. He began at the prestigious firm of Bondurant, Mixon and Elmore, where he's now a partner. But one of the early cases that Jason took was to fight the voter ID laws that then Governor, I guess it was Sonny Perdue, was pushing, requiring that voters show certain forms of ID before they could vote. Jason and Emmett Bondurant and others at the firm took the case pro bono and unfortunately lost, but put up a valiant effort. And we're all better off because of them and for their work. I'll close with a comment that Ken Canfield, another prominent lawyer in town, made about Jason when he was profiled in his On the Rise profile from 2009, and this was before Jason became a state senator. Ken said, "He's got amazing talents. There are people who are smart and do well in law school. I would think that if Jason doesn't go into politics, that the people of Georgia would be the worse for it." Fortunately, Jason did decide to go into politics, and we're all better off for it. It's my pleasure to introduce and to welcome my friend, former state senator, Jason Carter.
Thank you. At a lawyer event, I feel like it's very appropriate to be introduced by my lawyer. He left that part out, but ever since I got elected, or prior to being elected to the state senate, Jeremy is one of the people that I've turned to for not only legal counsel, but a host of other types of counsel, and he's been a really great, as many of you know, friend to me, but also advocate for justice and activity among lawyers here in this town and nationally. So I'm glad to have him here, and I'm glad that your law firm is the site of the event. So thank you for that. I also want to, those of you who are not from Georgia, welcome you. It is an important day of the year in my life because it's the opening day of the NCAA tournament. And I did go to Georgia. I also went to undergrad at Duke. And to the extent there are any Tar Heels in the room, I apologize, but I'm totally pulling for Tommy Amaker in Harvard today for my friends down the hall. I've never done that before. This place is an important one, and the heritage that this city holds, I think, is crucial. And every time I gave a speech over the last several years running for governor of this state, I talked about the real true heritage of Georgia. And in many, many ways, that fundamental brilliance of this state and this community is that it was the cradle of the transformative movement of American history in many ways. And if you haven't been while you're here to the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, you should go. It is a remarkable place. It is an emotional experience, and it is a reflection not just of one of the greatest, if not the greatest, achievements of our society, but it also is a testament to this place and its role in that movement. And I want to welcome those of you who are not from Georgia here, and as Jeremy said, it is the home, of course, of Dr. King and John Lewis and Andy Young and Joe Lowry and C.T. Vivian and so many others that I could stand here and name. And frankly, the folks that are around today continuing that work. And you know, my friends Gerald Durley and Tim McDonald, my pastor, I go to Ebenezer Baptist Church, and I don't know if y'all knew that, but that's where we've been going. And Raphael Warnock is a remarkable person who cares about Voting Rights Acts, who cares about voting rights, in general, and who's continuing on those great traditions in the names of all of the people who come before us. There's others. Steve Suits is here, Laughlin McDonald, Neil Bradley, and many others that continue that tradition. And the tradition, in addition to a civil rights tradition, it is a lawyer tradition. And those people that I mentioned, you know, Laughlin, Miles Alexander, Neil Bradley, Horace Ward, Leroy Johnson was a lawyer who was the first African-American state senator in Georgia. And he got, since Reconstruction, but the first one elected, and he got sworn in on the same day as my grandfather. And that idea that lawyers make a difference is one. We were joking about being in the Peace Corps in South Africa, but you know, one of the reasons I went back to law school was because I was there when Mandela was the president. And you watch the impact of having systemic pathologies that are ensconced in the law of a community and what it does to that community. And you realize that the people who led them out in South Africa were, I mean, Nelson Mandela. And you know, the other picture I have in my law office now is one of Mandela standing at his desk, which is covered in paper. And it's Mandela and Tambo, attorneys at law. That's what they did when it became criminal to be black in South Africa. The ability of lawyers to step forward and do that are real. And I think that's one of the reasons, and still one of the reasons, why I continue to be a lawyer and appreciate the role of groups like this. And I'll just mention two other lawyers that I was going to talk about, not knowing that one of them was here. But one person who's in Atlanta today who's doing incredible work that everybody should know about is Jonathan Rapping at Gideon's Promise. And the work that they do, they have tackled the process at a very sophisticated level of figuring out how to make sure that the justice system serves the poor in an appropriate way. That is crucially important. And the other person I was going to mention, and as like I said before, I'll show you, it's written down here, Francis. I'm not just doing it because you're here. Is my law school classmate, Francis Johnson. And Francis and I were in law school together. He's now, as you found out minutes ago, the president of the Georgia NAACP. He's the pastor of a church down in Bullitt County, or Scrubbin County. Bullitt County. And he's a lawyer. And when we needed to make sure that we found people to stand up to challenge the photo ID requirement for voting, his grandfather in his 90s, who had a third grade education and had never had a photo ID in his life, and had never missed an election. And the bottom line is that it is an indicator of what we have been able to achieve in this world, that the grandson of this person was able to represent him in the case where they tried to burden his right to vote for no reason. And at the same time, it shows, as we all know, how far we still have left to go. I could name a lot of others. The last person I want to name is a person who is not here today. But I have spent my legal career in the office next to Emmett Bonder. And for those of you that don't know Emmett, he would be here today. He's in Washington, D.C. on some pro bono project. But 52 years ago, in his early 20s, he argued the case of Westbury versus Sanders. And in the Supreme Court, and he won, and it applied the one person, one vote rule to congressional districts here in Georgia. And since that time, and even before that, of course, he's been an advocate for voting rights. And he believes that for government to work and for our Constitution to be protected, that it takes lawyers to do it. And frankly, it takes lawyers who are willing to walk into court and try cases about these issues to do it. And he will do that over and over and over again. And one of his fundamental principles that I believe in is he doesn't like bullies. That's what he would tell you. Hey, why'd you take this case? Well, I don't like bullies. Why'd you take that case? Well, I don't like bullies. And the bottom line is, in court, it's the best place where you know that you'll get the kind of hearing that you want and that the bully doesn't get to push you around, especially when you're talking about the kind of structural pathologies that we have in our system now. But it's not just big cases that Emmett has had. He represented my great-grandmother long ago when nobody knew who she was, and she was just this little old lady in South Georgia, and they were trying to desegregate the schools in Sumter County. And in the last decade, at his side, as Jeremy mentioned, I have been able to litigate some of the best or most important voting rights cases that we've had. And as has been mentioned, we challenged the photo ID requirement for voting, and we won. It was struck down, and then the legislature passed it and changed it substantially, and as you know, it was ultimately upheld. But in 2004, Georgia engaged in a blatantly partisan gerrymander of the Senate districts in Athens, Georgia. And I brought it to Emmett because one of my friends was involved and was going to run for office, and they didn't want her to win, so they drew new districts. And I said, Emmett, what do you think? You think we should take this case? And he said, this is his other guiding principle. The only way we'll lose this case is if we don't bring it or the judge gets it wrong. So we tried Larios versus Cox at 3-judge district court, and they got it wrong. And we, as we say in the South, bless their hearts. But then, as you've already discussed today, talking about the state, the ability to challenge different voting rights problems at the state level, we brought the same case in the Georgia state courts. And the Georgia Constitution at the time had a provision that said that you couldn't, that you would engage in redistricting as necessary after a decennial census. And so this mid-decade reapportionment was unnecessary. It wasn't after a decennial census. We put it to the Georgia Supreme Court, and bless their hearts too, I guess. But I don't want to leave you with the impression that we lose a lot of cases. I would put my law firm's reputation and record of winning big cases up against anybody else anywhere. But those two we did lose. But I'll tell you this, they're not windmills that we're tilting against. And if you're not willing to try these cases, then who is it that's going to do it? And the bottom line is that what we have now that we need to deal with are some, I keep saying the word structural pathologies, but these real serious problems that we have to confront. And in many ways, because they impact the political system itself, it means the political system is unable to deal with them. And if the political system is unable to deal with them, then the only place that we have left is the courts. And we have to continue to push that as lawyers. And yes, we should push for the legislative changes when we can get them. We should talk about the ways in which the state governments and the state constitutions can be used to undo some of the structural problems. But ultimately, we have to be willing to go and challenge these in court. And we have to be willing to say, here's a framework for how to do that. There is a constitutional protection against the misconduct. There is an analytical standard that allows the courts to decide it, and then because we're all courtroom lawyers, when you get to court, there has to be a method of proof for showing that it's been violated. And if we can go through that process and fight in those different ways, then I think that we'll be able to do it. And if we don't, as I said, if we don't do that, then who will? That's this organization's calling in many, many ways. I was going to talk about two of those aspects today, just because I've come sort of freshly off of the battlefield in this context. And the two issues that I see that are the most problematic, that undermine our democracy the most, are the partisan gerrymandering of different districts and then campaign money. And I'm not saying anything you don't know. But like I said, I just came off of these things. I mean, they in addition to producing more polarized representation, a more polarized electorate, the legislatures that are less able to govern normal people, and pushing responsibility away from our most representative branches to the executive branch, to a variety of other administrative offices, they also undermine voters' ability to interact with their democracy. They produce sort of cynical, weary, disengaged people with no confidence that the government has the ability to solve any problems, in part because that lack of confidence is well placed at this point. And so, again, I'm not telling you something that you don't know, but let me say this. I mean, I was in the Georgia Senate. I had a safe seat. Everyone had a safe seat. Everyone had a safe seat. There wasn't a single seat in the Georgia Senate when I left that was 55, 56% one way or the other. My seat was 75%, voted 70, I think 6% for Obama, and about 8% or 70% for me. And frankly, between the gerrymandering and the money, I personally benefited from both. Because I had this safe seat, there was nobody that was ever going to challenge me, and I'm one of the very small group of people who's in that political elite that can put together the millions and millions of dollars that it takes to run a real election. But at the same time, it let me see just how broken it is. In fact, I've raised more money when I just ran for governor than my grandfather did when he ran for president. That's crazy. And it's crazy. Let's talk first about gerrymandering. As I mentioned, it drives everybody to the extremes. And when you sit down in the state Senate in Georgia and any other legislature, I promise you will see the same thing. Folks sit there and the political incentives are absent. The political incentives are absent. Again, I watched a couple of years ago, just to give you an example, HB 87 was an immigration bill. It was a horrible bill. The Republicans didn't like it. They didn't want to vote for it, but they all knew that the only place they were ever going to get challenged was in their own primary. And the evidence that I have for the fact that there are good people down there trying to do the right thing, who are constrained by the politics, is this. We put an amendment. I went to the floor of the Senate and I put an amendment on this anti-immigrant bill that was going to make it was going to take away the ability for law enforcement to ask for people's papers for minor offenses. So if it was a obstructed license plate, they couldn't go and essentially profile somebody. And it was going to take that away and make it much more difficult. And go back and look at what happened in the Georgia Senate on that day. There's a balcony in the Georgia Senate. And above the balcony is where the gallery is, where the public is allowed to sit. And up under the balcony, there were about 15 Republicans. And on this particular amendment, there's a procedure in the Georgia Senate that allows you to vote it by hand, and they don't record how each person votes. And so I stood back there under the balcony with about 15 Republicans, and we hand voted and passed the amendment. Okay? And the next day or 2 days later, the House took it over. The House doesn't have that procedure. They forced it back through. It came back without the amendment, this horrible bill, and everybody who had to actually vote on the machine and record their name voted yes on the Republican side, and all the Democrats voted no. They didn't want to do it. They didn't want to do it. But that's the kind of extremism that gets bred by the process of having nobody ever confront the other side of the political debate. It is a broken system. What do we do about gerrymandering? Y'all are the lawyers. I look at it like this. As I said before, I still believe, based upon Davis and Veith to some extent, we still have that first prong of the requirement is there. I think it is a constitutional injury when people are discriminated against on the basis of how they voted in the past. I think that people deserve, and the Constitution protects us from having something that is an overtly partisan political gerrymander based upon the content of people's speech. And I think that we can find then the next question that we have to answer, which is there a method of analysis that allows a court to rule on it? That's what everybody is out there looking for. Again, there are smarter people here than me who are tackling that. I believe that we have a variety of ways to talk about it. The efficiency standard that has been talked about, whether or not there's a certain number of wasted votes, how we analyze partisan gerrymanders to determine if they are in fact partisan, is open, I think, for debate and discussion. And the last prong of that is, how do we prove it? And that question, those second two questions, I think are for us to try in court. I think we have to continue that process. I think that is the most important thing that we can do, at least until we end up with the Supreme Court taking away the first prong, which is the fact that it is cognizable. I also think, of course, that there are structural changes that can be made at the state level in order to take away the ability to gerrymander. And I personally advocated for an independent redistricting commission in Georgia multiple times, and frankly, there's bipartisan support for that, I believe, depending upon, the problem is there's never bipartisan support for it at the same time because one party is always in power. But I think that when the writing is on the wall in certain places, we can get those kind of structural advantages. But I also think that we have to continue to litigate it in court. Money, as I said, is disgusting. Money in politics, I spent so much of my time talking to people with money to the exclusion of anyone else. It's embarrassing. But if you don't get the modicum of money that you need, it is virtually impossible to win. Because the press doesn't matter in the face of the kind of spending that you'll see, because the information that is available to people or that people are willing to digest is so limited, and you're able to distort that information gathering process so much with money that it really changes the way that things operate. And it changes the way that they operate not only because it allows people to spend giant amounts of money in influencing elections, but because the barriers to entry for political people are so high. Like I said, my grandfather was the President of the United States. I can go out and raise the $10 million that we raised last year. But someone else, the people that this now position is reserved for is so small that we're not getting the kind of democracy that we want. And what happens to those candidates when they go out and spend their time, not spending time with regular people, but spending all of their time with the kind of folks that are going to fund their campaigns, it distorts their ability to function as a candidate. It undermines the great role that a campaign can play in preparing someone to be a governor or a senator or a legislator. And then once you get into office, we can talk with Common Cause and others about what it does to the ability of folks to function in office, because they know that, guess what, next time they're going to have to run again. And what do we do with that? We're in a slightly different situation, because the court, rather than say the Constitution protects against the misconduct, the court has determined that the Constitution in fact protects it. But we've been in that situation before too. Citizens United looks, this may be sacrilege, I don't know if I'll get in trouble for this or not, but it looks like Plessy. Okay, you think the Constitution protects it now, eventually it's going to look so bad, eventually things are going to get to be so horrible in this current democracy that we're not going to live with it anymore, and people are going to come to their senses and say, you know what, this can't possibly be what the Constitution meant it to be. That's just a fact. And I'll say this, don't be afraid on that one to reach across the aisle and have some faith in the people on the other side. And I told them, I was out on my way in here, that I was going to talk about how great the Federalist Society is. I talked on the day after he won his primary in the Republican Party, the now Senator David Perdue. I talked to him and said, talk to me about, can you believe, we bumped into each other, frankly, at an event my friend David Lefkowitz was there. But I said, congratulations on your victory, now you get to start over. I said, what do you think about money? And he said, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. we have to do something about it. And he's literally like a millionaire CEO Republican senator, right? So, I mean, we've got allies in this. Everyone sees it as broken. And the question is, our friends, as I said, in the Federalist Society, and they've got their James Madison logo on their ties and all that. I'm gonna read this quote in honor of Emmett from Westbury versus Sanders. It also quotes James Madison. And listen to what it says about the value of fighting these fights and about the voice that we're trying to protect. And this is the court, and then their quotation of the Federalist number 57. And for those of you who are interested, it's 376 U.S. at 17. No right is more precious in a free country than that of having a voice in the election of those who make the laws under which, as good citizens, we must live. Other rights, even the most basic, are illusory if the right to vote is undermined. Our Constitution leaves no room for classification of people in a way that unnecessarily abridges this right. In urging the people to adopt the Constitution, Madison said in number 57 of the Federalist, quote, "Who are the electors? Not the rich more than the poor, not the learned more than the ignorant," this is the part I like, "not the haughty heirs of distinguished names more than the humble sons of obscure and unpropitious fortune. The electors are the great body of the people of the United States." And you think about what our democracy has become, and to say that if we abide by that principle that's laid out there, you know, I mean, I might get one of the James Madison ties too. But that's what I believe. I appreciate it. I have taken a little bit of time, and I'm happy to, if anybody has a question, I'm happy to answer it. But otherwise, I just commend you all for being here, and believe that we have the ability to fight these fights, and we have an obligation to fight the fights. And the lawyers who've come before us and who are here with us, who have fought these battles in the past, are there. And if we are not going to do it, who is? That's the bottom line that we have. And so I'm so glad that y'all are here. I really appreciate the time that you've given me, and I'll look forward to working with y'all in the future. So thank you.